for children who are presenting with sensory seeking behaviors and sensory avoiding behaviors. But of course, if you suspect that your child may have a sensory processing disorder after this talk tonight, then of course talk to your child's pediatrician to definitely rule it out. So there are two types of children that fall under this category. Sensory processing is actually a very broad spectrum, and there's many different terms of kids that can range. You know, kids can be really under-responding and really over-responding to sensory information, but just for the purpose of tonight's talk and not to overcomplicate things, I'm just gonna divide it into sensory seekers and sensory avoiders. And just to define the two, your kids who are sensory avoiders are over responding to sensory stimulation. So their brain is telling them that there's way too much going on in the environment. So the lights are too bright, the sounds are too loud for them. That touch, that tap on the shoulder was way too much for them. And these are the type of kids that get very startled very easily. They shut down if another child is being a little loud, another child starts to cry, they'll shut their eyes, they'll try to run away. They don't really enjoy going on the swings, things that have a lot of movement. You know, if you take them to the playground, they won't really run that quickly. They kind of just walk around, stay at ground level. They don't like a lot of textures. And so for these kids, it's a lot of just desensitizing them to experiencing more sensory input. On the other side, you have kids who are sensory seekers, and these kids are under responding. So their brain is actually not giving them enough information. So if you tap them on the shoulder, they may not even feel that. So in order for them to even experience the sensation of touch, you have to give them a very firm and deep touch. And so these kids are a lot more obvious to point out because they're constantly seeking sensation. They're constantly running around. They don't have a sense of personal space because they like being touched. They like touching others. And so providing that sensory input for them throughout the day is what helps them. Otherwise, they seek it out themselves and they may not seek it in ways that are safe. And then, of course, you can have kids that are both sensory seekers and sensory avoiders. And that's actually very common. You know, I've worked with kids who may be sensory seeking when it comes to movement and touch, but they're very sensitive to sound. So it's very important to know kind of where your child lies with all these 7 senses that we talked about. So just some signs of kids who are sensory avoiders. Like I said, they don't like certain textures of clothing. They're easily distracted by background noise. They're really fussy with food textures. They don't like fragrances. They don't like bright lights or sunshine. They don't like getting their hands messy. And even they might start crying if you wash their hands and now their sleeves get wet. And then, like I said, they avoid playing on swings and slides because they don't like a lot of movement and they don't like elevated surfaces. Even going sometimes up the stairs they'll be a little shaky. And then just some signs of under-responsiveness. So your sensory seekers, these are the kids that appear to be hyperactive all the time. They just have this really just burst of energy at any given time of the day. They can appear excessively affectionate because they like tight hugs, they like to be touched, they like to cuddle, they like really strong flavors, they like to smell pretty much everything. You know, they'll smell people, animals, objects. They enjoy visually stimulating scenes, so like an aquarium with all the different sights and colors. They like things that spin. They enjoy noisy environments. They like going to the playground. They like going to the movie theater. Those sounds actually excite them. And they're constantly rocking in their chair or on the floor. Either their bodies are constantly moving or whatever is in their hand is constantly moving. And kids with sensory processing issues, I feel like they do a really, really good job at telling you kind of where they fall in this. So, you know, kids that crave a lot of movement are going to have a really hard time sitting still. Kids that are sensitive to sound, sensitive to smells, will be covering their ears, will be covering their nose. So I think it's really maybe a little obvious to know kind of where they fall, but it's more so a question of, okay, how can I help them? And now when we talk about the different strategies that I'm going to go into, I kind of broke it down into all the 7 senses. So we're going to go through sight, smell, sound, taste, and touch. And then I'm going to leave vestibular and proprioceptive for the end and maybe talk a little more about those because that's the conversations that I have a lot with my parents. It's for the kids that are craving a lot of movement and craving a lot of deep pressure. And those I will talk about towards the end. So let's talk about sight and vision. So I'm going to start off with sensory avoiders. And these are the kids that are really distracted by visual stimulation. So if you're trying to get them to do their work, if they're doing independent reading, if they're doing, logging onto their remote lesson, and they're by a wall that has pictures, paintings, anything, their eyes will be there. Their eyes will be out the window. Their eyes will be looking at everything else. They're constantly distracted by visual stimulation. And so for them, ideally place them by a bare wall. If there are things on the wall, maybe take them down for the time being while they finish their remote lesson or whatever work that they're trying to get done. Try to have them away from windows, from doors, or really high traffic areas of the house. So a lot of my students, I see they work in the kitchen. And so that's a place where people are constantly coming in and out of. And so sometimes I would just suggest to parents that this may not be the best place for a child who's visually distracted. And then, and I can understand sometimes that it's hard, you don't always have the flexibility to move a child around, or maybe, the walls are painted with really bright colors and you can't repaint the house, of course. So you can always set up desk dividers. And I actually do that all the time in my therapy sessions. And you can, create a desk divider from cardboard box and, kind of create a little cubicle for your child to kind of block out all visual distractions. And it's also helpful if they're sharing that workspace with another sibling to kind of block off what they're doing as well. In terms of lighting, direct lighting might be too harsh, so kind of keep them away from the source of light. Sometimes lamps are a little more gentle than overhead lights. Try to use natural lighting as much as possible. Maybe have your child work earlier in the day so you can use natural lighting. Just be mindful of any glares on the computer screen if your child is using Zoom. And then speaking of Zoom, there's a lot of things that you can do when your child is sitting for their remote lesson. Maybe reduce the brightness of the screen, have anti-glare screens, anti-glare glasses, maybe lightly tinted glasses for your child. I'm trying to think. And then also be mindful on Zoom, try to have it on active speaker view and not the gallery view grid where they can kind of see all the classmates, because that can be visually distracting as well. And then that's Zoom. So when they're working maybe on paper and working in their workbook, oftentimes a lot of my kids are distracted by everything that's on their workbook. So if they're doing problem number 1, they're looking at the picture that goes under problem number 20. So maybe take like a blank sheet of paper and cover everything else that's on the workbook and only show the problem that they're working on. So similar to when they're writing, if they're writing, I'll take a piece of paper and I'll cover everything and just show one line at a time. You can bend the paper, you can cut it out, only because it's just too much visual distraction for your child, and that might hinder them from being able to focus on what they have to do. So really reducing visual distractions is very important. And then even having your child lie on their bellies can sometimes help, because when you're sitting up, you're more likely to kind of look around, whereas when you're lying on your belly, it helps you to kind of just focus on what's in front of you. So prone sitting is something that I always recommend to my parents. And just on this list, I wrote that they often lose place when they're copying from the board, and that can be, more so an issue in the classroom. And then so we often have students sit closer, use a slant board so they're not, looking down and looking all the way up. Teach them chunking strategy so they're copying 2 words at a time, 3 words at a time. Again, that's more so strategies in the classroom. And then kids who are visually distracted actually feel really calm with dim lights. So if you feel like your child is really overstimulated, give them maybe a 5-minute break. turn off the lights, dim the lights, have them lie down, have them have their head down, and just kind of let them calm down and return to baseline before continuing their lesson. And sometimes I have to do that in the school setting too, even in the therapy room, just turn off the lights and just kind of help them kind of de-stress because it's just very overstimulating. So much goes on for our little kids. So and dimming the lights is kind of like that quick fix. And then we have our sensory seekers, and they love visual stimulation, and it actually alerts them. It helps them focus. So giving your child opportunities to play with toys that are visually stimulating will really help them focus. You can have them play before their remote lesson, maybe between when you give them sensory breaks. Kids can often have difficulty writing because they crave a lot of visual stimulation. They have a hard time writing because they may not see how close their letters are together. They may not see the lines on the paper unless it's really bold. So making the lines bold for them using highlighted paper so they know exactly where their letters are ending is really helpful for them to focus. And then just giving them opportunities to engage in visually stimulating activities, and then using visual stimulation even during their lessons. Use different colored markers when you're giving them instructions, highlight instructions for them, just helping them kind of attract them to the lesson they have at hand. So that is vision. Next, we're going to go to sound. And this is actually very, very common. I work with kids who are avoiding sounds quite often. They startle to unexpected sounds. They have a really hard time focusing in noisy environments. They avoid crowds. They feel really anxious in crowds, which may not be an issue right now during COVID, but outside of COVID, they just don't like large gatherings. So I'll start off with the obvious, create a quiet area for them when they're trying to learn, when they're trying to focus at home. I understand that sometimes that's not easy. My kids have other siblings. They may have a sibling that's a child, a baby who's crying. They may have pets, and it may not be always easy to create a quiet area in the house for them. So I always, I recommend noise reducing headphones. And these are great because they kind of block out all the background noise, but you can still hear the main voice in the room. So they can still hear the parent giving instructions. They can still hear the teacher giving instructions, but all other sounds are kind of like muted. And we use that in the school setting a lot, especially recess, the cafeteria. If there's maybe a fire drill that we know, a fire drill rehearsal, I'll make sure that my student has their headphones on them. And you always want to let them know if you're going to a place that will get loud or any event that might get loud. So if you have cousins that are coming over, you can let your child know that, it might get loud, the noise might feel big. And then just have some strategies in place. If it gets too loud, you can, go to your room, or you can use your headphones and kind of just have a kind of plan ready for them. And then in our more extreme cases, we do create and suggest kind of quiet area in the room, a calm down corner, as I say, and this can be in the classroom, this can be in their room. It's literally a place where they can kind of escape to during times of just a lot of stimulation. And sometimes in the classroom, I kind of literally place a tent in the corner of the room. This can be a little tent. It can be under a table, under, a bunk bed, whatever it is, but it's a place where your child can go and escape to when they are just overstimulated with sound or even visual stimulation. And I'll put some calming toys in there to help them calm down. Sometimes I'll set a timer so they know they can't be in there all day, but I'll let them know, once you're ready, you can come back and we're going to continue our work. So creating kind of a calm down area in the house is really helpful. Like I said, it can be anywhere. It can even be in a closet, wherever you find works for your child. And then you have your kids who enjoy loud sounds. And because they enjoy loud sounds, they may not hear things that aren't loud enough. So oftentimes they don't hear you call their name. They don't remember or hear the instructions you gave them. So you might think that they're just not paying attention, but sometimes the brain just does not register it for them. And so always use visual instructions with them as well. A visual schedule is really helpful, letting them know, okay, today in the morning, 9 a.m., we have math, and then we have reading, and then just having that visual for them because they may not remember or hear instructions. Giving them one-step instructions are also helpful. If you say too many things at once, they may not register everything. And then these are the kids who sometimes while they're working, they're humming to themselves, they're singing to themselves. And as a parent, you might say like, stop singing, pay attention to what you have to do. And ironically, that is helping them pay attention, similar to how I was listening to, I listen to heavy rain, sounds when I'm focusing. They kind of need a little bit of sound to help them focus. So, trying to tell them to stay quiet might not help them. And if it's okay, you can let them continue humming. You can say hum a little lower. You can have maybe a sound machine, a white noise machine on, whether it's a white noise machine or something you're playing on your phone. Giving them opportunities to listen to something appropriate throughout the day really gives them that auditory input that they're seeking. So now let's talk about taste and oral sensation. So I'm going to talk about my sensory avoiders, and these are the kids who don't like the taste of foods. They may not like the textures, and oftentimes even the smell. Usually taste and smell go hand in hand. And I'll get into smells a little later. But our sensory avoiders, they may be underweight and deficient in nutrients, and that's because they eat very limited ranges of food. They refuse to try new foods. And so for these kids, it's a very gradual process of desensitizing them. And a lot of my parents might be like, okay, so what if my child is just a really picky eater, and what's the difference? Well, the difference between a picky eater and a child who has a sensory processing issue is that it's a very strong aversive reaction when they place that texture in their mouth or even swallow it. They'll actually start gagging. They'll even vomit if they try to swallow a texture that they don't feel comfortable with. So it's a very strong reaction. It's not so much like, I don't like Burger King fries. I like McDonald's fries. It's like, I cannot be around this texture. I feel really anxious around this texture. And they'll also avoid that texture with all other things. So if they don't like the texture of mashed potatoes, for example, they may not like to play with soft Play-Doh because it's something very similar. So, you just have to notice, are they avoiding this texture completely, or is it just, with food? So, and it's usually with all things. So we tell our parents to really slowly desensitize your child. Maybe if they're not comfortable with, let's just say broccoli, for example, just have them first tolerate it being on the dinner table. When they're comfortable with that, you can just invite it to their dinner plate. You can let them know like, okay, it's just going to be on your plate. It's not touching anything else. You don't have to eat it. You don't have to do anything with it. And once they're okay with that, they can play with it. They can touch it. They can touch their other food. And then once they graduate with that, they can touch their lips with it. They can lick it. And then eventually going to actually taking a bite, giving them the option to spit it out, and then eventually hopefully swallowing it. So it's a very gradual process. You never want to force a child. Like I said, it's a very strong reaction when they swallow it. And then just temporary quick fixes would be just serving that food in other forms. If they don't like potatoes mashed, serve it in a different way, and mixing it with preferred food items. And of course, if you are concerned about your child's weight and nutrition, then please, speak to your child's pediatrician and see what can be done about that.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. We have a question.
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. So going back to your previous slide, when you were mentioning the sensory seekers.
Did I go to was it this one?
Oh, no. Oh. No, the sensory seeking, where you were talking about humming,
Yes.
while, concentrating. So a lot of times that may not be appropriate or tolerated in the classroom setting.
Right.
So what other suggestions would you have that, we could maybe work with the school, with the IEP or 504 plan?
Absolutely, yeah. So definitely giving your child opportunities to listen to something throughout the day is helpful, but also, and this will go into when I talk about sensory seekers that crave a lot of oral input, giving them something to bite, something to chew actually helps with that as well. And I'm going to talk about some items that are okay to chew on, some products that I recommend, and usually having a chewing toy can help a child who's constantly humming and making sounds. And then, of course, just giving them opportunities to receive auditory input, whether it's during playtime or a choice time. You can say, like, when you're done with your work, you can, have 5 minutes playing with these musical toys, and then just giving them that choice to receive that input after their work is done.
Thank you.
So that actually leads into our talk about sensory seekers who crave oral input and who crave a lot of strong flavors. So like I said, they can have something to chew on. This is something that we use often in the school setting. They can wear it around their neck. These are the kids that literally bite, mouth, lick everything. Their pencils, their erasers. And so these chewing toys they can be pencil toppers as well. Again, that can be around their neck or on a pencil. Having them suck through a straw as opposed to just drinking through a cup really helps because that suctioning is really providing a lot of good oral input around the mouth. Giving them crunchy snacks, giving them chewy snacks really is a great way for them to receive input, whether it's, before their lesson or even during when they're doing their homework, just give them some snacks, dried fruits, Laffy Taffies, things of that sort. Even like a peppermint spray, because these really strong bursts of flavor help them focus. And so just having that at hand, if you feel like they're kind of becoming a little sluggish and they're losing focus and they're starting to lick things and bite things, just giving them a little burst of flavor in their mouth can really help. These are the kids that sometimes do bite things that, of course, are non-food items, but just kind of giving them things that they can bite on when they feel that way is okay. And I let them know, like, it's okay if you feel like biting something, but this is what's okay to bite and this is what's not okay to bite, and just really helping them differentiate what's okay and what's not okay. And then one more thing I wanted to mention about this slide is a lot of kids who have sensory seeking behaviors when it comes to taste and oral, they may not enjoy drinking water because of the lack of flavor. So you can always add maybe like a citrusy fruit to it, like maybe a lemon or anything, just to kind of add a little flavor to water, because that sometimes is a concern that parents have. So now we're going to talk about touch, and we're going to talk about our sensory avoiders who just hate getting their hands messy. They dislike textures. They don't like certain clothings, texture, seams, tags, things of that sort. So again, our sensory avoiders, it's a lot of just desensitizing them. Sometimes if I want to do something messy, like do finger painting, I can first start off with having them wear gloves. And maybe they can be longer gloves, like in the picture, that go up to the elbows, and maybe have them wear shorter gloves as they become more comfortable. And even if you take one glove off and get them a little more comfortable. Also, long paintbrushes initially, and then gradually giving them a shorter paintbrush as they get more comfortable. Sensory bins are great, and I suggest that to my parents all the time. Literally you can take any bucket in the house, fill it with rice, lentils, beans, really anything that your child would like to play with, and then adding different textures in there. A child who's sensory avoiding may not like everything, so you can start off with fewer textures, and as they get more comfortable, add maybe a new texture a week. And it can literally be anything that you have in the house. Sometimes it could be like a loofah sponge in there. Literally anything that has texture, which is easy to find around the house. And then kids who have a hard time with clothing, of course, you can just find things that don't have seams, cut off the tags, but also wearing spandex underneath outfits can help. It's really that really deep pressure and that firm feeling calms them down. And that kind of goes into proprioception, which I will talk about later. But having them wear that underneath can help as well if they're really struggling with their clothing. And so our sensory seekers are the ones who just love being messy. They love painting, they love getting their hands messy. And so for them, again, you can use sensory bins, during either right before remote learning or between when you want to give them a sensory break, just have them play with their sensory bins, add a bunch of different textures, just for them to kind of really get that craving that they're seeking. These are the kids who may not notice when you touch them, so they respond better when you give them a firm touch. They are constantly touching other people. They're constantly touching objects. So really creating a clutter-free desk for them, because whatever you have on the desk, they will try to grab it. They will try to touch it. And then even teaching them personal space. I know now 6 feet is the rule, but of course, outside of COVID, I used to teach the kids, an arm's length is how much space you should leave. And then these kids use a lot of pressure when they're writing, and you can, definitely add more sensory experiences when they're writing. So if you're teaching your child letters, if you're teaching them their name, if you're teaching them sight words, have them write letters in a box of, here you have a picture of a sandbox, which of course we don't all have sand lying around, but you can have salt. You can have rice, you can have shaving cream, and have them literally use their finger to practice their letters, practice their words, and they'll be more attentive, they'll be more compliant when you add sensory experiences to their work. Even putting sandpaper under their paper can provide sensory input. Maybe putting a cork board under their paper. And then wearing spandex for sensory seekers as well. It kind of goes both ways. Sensory avoiders and seekers do enjoy that kind of snug feeling underneath or on their body, and it's calming to both. So now we're going to get into smells. Our sensory avoiders are overwhelmed by smells that others may not find unpleasant. So these are the kids that may not feel comfortable being in the cafeteria or in restaurants. They may not like a lot of fragrances. And so just being mindful of, products that you have at home, fragrance-free cleaners, you maybe use a fragrance-free detergent, because whatever you're washing their clothes with, they're going to be smelling it on themselves all day long, which can be distracting. Not spraying any perfumes, being in a well-ventilated room will help them as well. And then maybe if mom or dad are cooking and the child is trying to do their homework or they're logged on to their remote lesson, maybe plan it accordingly and schedule your cooking during times when your child doesn't need to be focused on an activity. And then of course, actually, I'll get into that when I talk about sensory seekers. So sensory seekers are the opposite. They actually like very strong smells, and they can underreact to strong smells as well. And the reason I put that little danger sign is because, these are the kids that literally will smell everything. I had a student who, constantly had to smell his chair. He would be working, would get up, smell his chair. And if I had to put him in a new chair, he would have to smell it before he sat down. And these, and sometimes these kids might smell other people, and things of that sort. So really helping them know what's okay and what's not okay. As your child gets older and can read, you can teach them to read expiration dates. You can teach them to read warning labels. And if they're younger, you can definitely have them work on reading other people's cues, letting them know, like, if other people are not smelling this in the classroom, or if other people are not smelling this, you should not be smelling this. And giving them opportunities to receive strong smells throughout the day. You can have a scented candle by them when they're doing their work. Oil diffusers are great, but something that's really low cost, you can just boil some water, throw in, maybe some lemon, some cinnamon sticks, just to create a very strong aroma for your children in the house while they're working. And then even their toys, you can have scented Play-Doh, scented toys. I know they create a lot of those nowadays. Sometimes I use scented markers. The only thing with that is if your child may not have the receptive communication skills to understand that these markers are scented, but those aren't, maybe I might not use them because they may be like smelling permanent markers and not knowing which ones are okay. So maybe not use markers that are scented, but if they can understand the difference and knowing that these markers are okay to smell and those aren't, then of course that would be great too while they're working. So now we're going to get into the big one, vestibular input. And this is what I get asked all the time by my parents. How can I get my child to sit still? And it's very important to know that that shouldn't be the goal. You know, you shouldn't want your child to sit still. The goal should rather be, how can I have my child pay attention, or how can I have my child remain in their seat? Because I often tell my students that it's okay to move in your chair. You can move, but you have to stay seated. Or, you know, and like I said, you know, even we as adults, sometimes when we're thinking, you know, I might just get up and start pacing, and that helps me to think. So kind of taking that movement away from them is a disservice to them. So there's two ways that that can be done to help them remain in their seats and help them remain focused. You can either provide that movement in their chairs, or giving them opportunities to get up and move. I'm just trying to see how I can mute. Sorry, I don't get a mute option. Okay. So just some things. So these kids are the ones that are constantly rocking, they're fidgety in their chairs, they constantly get up and walk around. They love to run fast. They love, you know, playing tag, and they lose attention when they're seated for a really long period of time. So oftentimes in the classroom, you know, I'll try to provide the movement in their chairs, or sometimes I'll let them know, like, you know, if you remain in your seat for maybe 10 minutes, you know, then we're going to give you a sensory break and you can get up and walk around. And you know how long your child's attention span is. If they're, you know, it takes them 5 minutes before they're up and out of their seat, then maybe give them 5 minutes before a sensory break, and then tomorrow make it 6 minutes, and then gradually kind of increase that. So just some no-cost strategies, just having them get up and do some jumping jacks. It's really great. I love doing animal walks with my students, you know, walking, doing bear walks, crab walks, wheelbarrow walking is another great one. And then of course, if you have the means, you know, you can have a mini trampoline in the room. You know, they're really small. They can go in the corner of the room, a pogo stick. And I think these are great because they can be used outdoors and indoors. So you can always have that. And then if you want to provide movement in their chairs, there is alternative seating. And I, you know, of course, I always try to mention low cost strategies first. So a seat cushion is something I always recommend before I recommend any chair, only because you can kind of take that seat cushion wherever you go. If you're sitting at the dining table, if you're taking it to grandma's house, if you're sitting on the floor, if you're sitting in the car, kind of goes with you. You fill it up with air, and then usually the top of the surface is textured. So it kind of provides that tactile input as well. So seat cushions are great because, you know, again, you can sit anywhere, you can even stand on it, and it provides a lot of movement for your child. And then just other seats, you know, you can sit, a wobble stool is a great one. We have that in a lot of our schools that I work in, sitting on a therapy ball, the bottom left-hand corner, sitting in a rocking chair, sitting in a scoop seat. And then I know for our older kids, there's like gamer chairs that you can have for them. And sometimes I have seen that being used with teenagers. And it's similar to that scoop seat. I don't have a picture of it here, but it allows them to rock when they're sitting on the floor. And then a hammock is also great, because a hammock kind of gives you that firm, deep pressure as well. And I'll talk more about that when I talk about proprioception. And so it gives you that firmness, it gives you that tactile input, while also providing that movement. And then I added this last picture on the bottom right-hand corner because it was a DIY hammock that I saw a parent do using just blankets and a table. And I thought that was very creative. And then, so, I mean, and of course, if you don't have these chairs, that's totally okay. You know, just giving your child opportunities to kind of take a break and move around is great, whether they're going up and down the stairs, whether they're going from one point to the next, and then really just making it functional. You know, I don't usually just have my students jump aimlessly. You know, I'll give them a target. I'll be like, can you jump and touch this point on the wall? Or can you jump up and take this off the wall? And then sometimes if I know they're working on sight words, or if they're working on their name, I'll put up Post-its, and each Post-it has one letter. So if their name is John, you know, I'll have John, and they'll have to jump and take off the Post-it that has a J, then the O, and then I'll put it at different heights. So they're jumping up, jumping lower, and just getting that movement throughout the day is really helpful, whether it's during the activity, between the lessons, before, after. The kids just definitely need that movement. And then our sensory avoiders are the ones that actually don't like a lot of movement. Like I said, they kind of stay on ground level in the playground. They get motion sickness quite frequently. They're fearful of sitting on raised surfaces, and they refuse to play sports. Maybe gym is probably not their favorite class in school. And so just really providing them with opportunities to play on ground level, maybe through a tunnel, and providing a secure base of support when they're sitting. So, you know, providing them with a step stool when they're sitting. This kid doesn't have it, but armrest on the chairs, just so they don't feel as if they're not really secure in their chair. And that kind of helps them focus because they're not fearful of falling over. And then, of course, they'll be desensitizing them as well and getting them used to kind of sitting on slightly higher surfaces. And the last sense we're going to talk about is proprioception. This one we as OTs preach all the time because this is actually good for sensory seekers and sensory avoiders. And it's calming to both. As you see, I didn't divide it because you can use it with all your kids. And then this is your sense of deep pressure. So like I said, those receptors are in your muscles, your ligaments, your joints, so really anything that requires you to feel pressure in your joints, whether it's carrying heavy objects, whether it's pulling, pushing heavy objects. So first thing first, lying down on your belly is great because you're really feeling that deep pressure all throughout your body. I always recommend that. Like I said, it's good for attention, you know, visually, you focus on what's in front of you. And, you know, with proprioception, you're really getting that input throughout the body. Heavy work is great. Literally, heavy work is carrying heavy objects. Sometimes I have my parents put extra books in their child's book bag and really strap the straps so that they're snug, and have them walk around the house. You know, as long as the weight of the book bag is no more than 10% of your child's weight, you know, it's definitely okay. They actually enjoy heavy objects, having them push and pull, having them open windows, open doors, carrying like a heavy laundry basket to the washing machine, carrying dishes to the dinner table, pretty much all your chores, right? So definitely get your children more involved. Like I said, these strategies should be implemented throughout the day in your normal routine. So you kind of just want to give them heavy work throughout the day. And then animal walks, I mentioned here again, I love animal walks because, for example, if you're doing bear walks, if you're doing frog jumps, you're getting that movement. So the vestibular movement, but then you're also getting that deep pressure. So when you land, those joints really feel that pressure. So it's great both ways. And usually they're always coupled together. If your child is craving a lot of movement, they will crave deep pressure, and you usually should be coupling those two things together. Wall push-ups are great, chair push-ups right underneath it, those are great. And then these are just some strategies that you can teach your child to do on themselves. Usually if your child's a little older, I don't usually want to put my hands on them. So just teaching them to take their palms and really pressing them together. And you can try this, you know, in your seats as well. Taking your thumb and pressing into your palms, and the more firm, the better. Taking your palms and giving yourself self squeezes. And you don't want to be using your fingers. It's really the palms that are pressing firmly to give yourself a squeeze. Like I said, go firm, and you can, you know, assess your child. If they're telling you it feels good, great. And if they're saying it doesn't feel good, then you know to not do that. And different kids respond to different sensory strategies. So always kind of see your child's reaction. So these are no cost strategies, and just some things to, if you have the means, of course, you can purchase. just starting from the top left-hand corner, a body sock. You know, and my kids love this. It's made from lycra material, it's a spandex. And so really feeling that resistance helps them feel deep pressure. A weighted blanket, a weighted lap pad is great if your child is working at the desk. The bottom left-hand corner is also similar to the body sock, but it's a stretchy bed sheet to help your child sleep, to help them feel more calm at night. And then weighted pencils is another great thing for our kids who just really want a lot more sensory input while they're writing. And then similar to a weighted lap pad, we have weighted shoulder pads as well. So as your child is doing their work, you can provide that weight, whether on their shoulders or on their laps. And then all the way here on the far right, I have a desk that we usually set up kind of this desk in our therapy room where we put TheraBands or resistive bands on the chairs of the leg. And so a lot of our sensory seeking kids constantly move around, constantly move their legs. So kind of receiving that deep pressure and that sensory input as they're sitting really helps them focus. And then pairing that with the seat cushion, we often see that is very effective. So like I said, before you purchase any chair, try just adjusting the seats that they have at home, adding those resistive bands, adding a seat cushion, adding maybe a lap pad or something weighted. And you can even create that at home, you know, taking a blanket or taking a pillowcase and filling it with rice, filling it with beans, and then creating almost like a DIY lap pad instead. And then just something I wanted to just add as a side note, just to prevent sensory overload, always give your child choices. So if you feel like they need a sensory break, you know, you can say, do you want to do animal walks or do you want to get up and do jumping jacks? I wouldn't do more than 3 choices because that in and of itself might be overstimulating. So 2 to 3 strategies. If they have to do their work, you know, just let them know, like, we have to do math. Do you want to sit on the rocking chair or do you want to lay down on your belly? Definitely set expectations using all 5 senses. So if you're taking your child to the mall, you know, let them know what to expect. You know, certain stores might have really loud music. You can wait outside with dad, or you can have your headphones. The food court is where we're going to be eating. You might smell a lot of different smells. You might hear a lot of sound. So just letting them know what to expect using all 5 senses. And then of course, plan ahead, you know, wherever you're going, make sure you bring your child sensory items, things that you know work for them, whether it's that chewing toy, whether it's their headphones, and just planning ahead, knowing, you know, if my child does kind of go through sensory overload, where can they be, whether it's inside the car or whether, you know, they can walk outside, you know, what can my child do to kind of escape from that overstimulation. And then the last thing I just wanted to say, how to implement it into your daily routine. So this is just a hypothetical scenario that I created, you know, really just try to make this as natural as possible. So when your child wakes up, have them help you make their bed, you know, because really pulling on those sheets and like bringing them under the mattress, lifting the mattress really provides that deep pressure. You know, having them run from one side of the bed to the other side is giving them that movement. When they're brushing their teeth, maybe have a vibrating toothbrush to give them that oral input. Have the toothpaste scented if they're craving that scent. Crunchy and chewy textures for your meals. You know, always have, you know, crunchy snacks at hand. Animal walks, chair pushes before your remote lesson. During your remote lesson, you can implement sensory strategies. Provide sensory breaks throughout their lessons. Then of course, a weighted blanket while they're reading, while they're napping, while they're sleeping, things of that sort. So definitely, you never want to wait till your child just reaches a point where they're just overwhelmed and just going through sensory overstimulation. So just implementing it throughout the day will help them not reach that point where they just are having a hard time coming back to baseline. So that's pretty much all that I have for today. I know that was a lot of information. I'm sorry if I went too quickly. But before I do get into the questions, I also wanted to mention as a resource to you all, I do have a blog where I write up exactly what I was saying. I do write blog posts to help parents of special needs children. And this idea did spark during remote learning when I saw that a lot of parents were having a challenging time supporting their children at home who weren't getting in-person therapy anymore, who who weren't getting that continuous support from school personnel. So I write, posts to help, implement strategies at home, whether it's sensory strategies or ways to help your child with ADHD focus and things of that sort. So you can definitely follow my blogs. And also it's a way to keep in touch and contact me if you ever have questions. I will be more than willing to help and respond.